few years back, I met one of my batchmates at an airport. This friend of mine during his college days was the proverbial backbencher. He would just scrape across exams, get the bare minimum grades, while we were running after marks and were trying to make it big in world. As I spoke with him, I realized while the entire batch of students joined a corporate or were working for someone, he started his own business. He became an entrepreneur, and today he is employing around 20 engineers like us in his own company. That set the ball rolling for me. I started thinking, why was it that only he became an entrepreneur? Why not any one of us? People may say, you are in a business family, so you can get into a business. If you're not from a business family, it may be difficult. But that is a myth. Think of Steve Jobs. Think of Bill Gates. What about Elon Musk or our good old Ritesh Agarwal of Oyo from home? They are all first generation entrepreneurs. What makes them different? What is it? Is there something that makes these people stand apart from us? Management research has found an answer to this. Management research says us, the non-entrepreneurial group of people, have a logic, the causal logic for thinking or defining the world. But the entrepreneur uses something called the effectual logic for defining the world. And that makes a difference. Today we'll be discussing about the 5 principles of effectuation. Why would we do that if we are not an entrepreneur? Why will that help us? Well, the good news is, if a non-entrepreneur tries to practice these principles, he can be trained to think like an entrepreneur. With this tool and techniques, he can think like an entrepreneur, get the entrepreneurial orientation. So will the world change for him? No. But the way he looks at the world will definitely change for him. So first, we go for the 5 principles of effectuation. The first principle that we have is called the bird in hand. Yes, you have heard it right. It speaks about the bird in hand. You know the proverb, the bird in hand, a bird in hand is worth 2 in the bush. An entrepreneur does exactly that when he thinks about his resources. Let me give you an example. Suppose we want to start a restaurant. What do? We try to find out what would be the expenses, what would be the money that I will need to start such a restaurant. And I do a project report, I find out that I need around say 50 lakhs to start a proper restaurant. And now I go out, approach investors and say that if you give me 50 lakhs, I will start a restaurant. And what are the chances of getting 50 lakhs from someone who is ready to invest? Very slim. What does an entrepreneur do at such point in time? An entrepreneur will first look at the other options that can be explored. He looks at what he has and not what he has to get in order to reach a goal. We set a goal first and then go out to collect the resource to make the goal happen. But an entrepreneur looks inside and sees what he has, what is in store with him already. And then he uses his imagination and he tries to make the most of what he has, the bird in hand. So what then entrepreneur would be doing? The entrepreneur would maybe explored the possibility of starting a home kitchen. Even that is not possible. So he tries to go out and give cookery lessons to someone because he is interested in that, he has that skill. Suppose that is also not possible. An entrepreneur will not stop. He will look at what he has, and maybe he will see that all he has is an iPhone. So what he does, he goes out and becomes a food blogger, starts uploading his food blogging channel, reviewing street food. He starts getting views, his channel becomes bigger, and then one day his popularity increases and people give him an assignment to review a restaurant. And from there he becomes a food critic. And from there he can start his dream, maybe cookery classes, and then graduate to starting a home kitchen. And maybe after 2 or 3 years, he ultimately starts his dream restaurant. But this journey did not start from the goal, but it started from the resource, the bird in hand. So what does an entrepreneur do? How is he different from us? He will not wait for the resources, the right resources to come, but he will look at what resource he already has and he will try to make the most of it. Think of your mother. If she says, today we are going to have palak paneer, she is restricted by the recipe. She has to get palak, she has to get paneer and the different set of masala, or else the dish that she will cook will not be palak paneer. So she is restricted by the availability of these resources. But think of it. She goes to the refrigerator and looks at the resources that she has, maybe a leftover from last night's dinner, some masala, some curry paste and some exotic vegetable, and now she has the opportunity to innovate, to explore, and she can come up with a new recipe, maybe palak pasinda or something her own, and that is what an entrepreneur does. So the first principle, bird in hand, helps you to innovate. And it lets you start, get going, and not wait for the world to help you out. The second principle talks about a misconception that we all have. We all feel entrepreneurs are risk takers, they sometimes leave their job and start a business. What happens if it fails? Now, an entrepreneur does take a risk, but he takes a calculated risk. For us, when we look at a project, what do we look at? We look at the possibility of earning millions. We look at how much profit the new venture can generate. What an entrepreneur does is just the opposite. He looks at the maximum, the worst case scenario, and tries to find out what would be the maximum loss. What can go wrong with this business? So we non-entrepreneurs look at what can be the projected profit, and the entrepreneur does just the opposite. He looks at what can be the maximum loss, and then he checks his resources and he tries to find out whether he can afford it. So he looks at the maximum loss that can be generated, and then he sees whether can he afford it. If he can, he'll take the risk. If he feels that he cannot, he will not. So what happens? An entrepreneur sees at the loss, but we look at the projected profit. So projected or anticipated loss and the level of the loss. Can he afford it? If he can, he will take up, or else he will not. So the second principle is the principle of affordable loss. Talking about the third principle, they say when life gives you lemon, what do? You make a lemonade out of it, right? That is exactly what entrepreneurs do. We are afraid of changes. Whenever there is chaos, we find disaster in it. We fail to identify the opportunity associated with a problem. An entrepreneur always takes a problem as an opportunity, and he tries to convert that to be a potential business. I'll give you an example. There was one textile company in the early 70s or 80s. They were exporting printed shirts for European country. And in one terrible mistake during the production process, the batch of shirts went on to the dyeing machine without a fixing agent. So what happened? The shirts were printed okay, but when you wash the shirt, the color would start bleeding. So this company, unaware of this problem, shipped an entire shipment to the European buyer, and then the complaints started pouring in. And the European buyer was furious. They called up and said, please take back your shipment, we want a refund, and the company was about to be closed. If this deal falls through, then the company is done. The entrepreneur had a brilliant idea. What he did was, instead of taking back the shipment, he sent his marketing team there, and they started marketing these shirts as a special variety of shirt, which will be unique in the sense, whenever you wash this shirt, the colors bleed and a unique design is created. And every shirt will be different after washing. The print of the shirt will be different for everyone. The shirt will be one piece only, it would be unique. And he marketed these shirts as bleeding Madras variety of shirts. Chennai was Madras in those days. So what happened? Instead of taking back the shipment, people started asking for more bleeding Madras shirts, and the company revived. So this is an example of how entrepreneurs make lemonade out of lemons. Cheers to the entrepreneur. I believe we all have a textile like this at our home. We call it the crazy quilt. Why crazy? Because you see, this is a piece of cloth of a different color, and this is from a completely different cloth of a different color, different texture. All these are from different pieces of cloth stitched together, but together they are in perfect harmony. They're creating a design which is unique and beautiful. An entrepreneur does exactly the same thing while choosing his stakeholders. What we do, non-entrepreneurs, is we have a fixed set of stakeholders in our mind, and we approach them to get some resource. Now, an entrepreneur, I give you an example what an entrepreneur does. Now, suppose I am in the process of making a computer, and I believe that I should go to a computer engineer or a person who is purely technical, who knows about computers, and involve them as stakeholders in my business. But what an entrepreneur will do? He will take his idea to different set of people, maybe a cook, maybe a designer, maybe an artist, maybe a sportsman, and see how or in what way they can contribute to his business. So the business will be looked upon not just by a single set of stakeholders. There will be multiple set of people, the people who will be using, and each of them will look at the solution from their perspective, which will be different. So multiple perspectives combine together, and the stakeholders self-select. That is, they themselves approach the entrepreneur, oh, I can add this value to this particular product, and they become a part of the journey. So that way, the product becomes more innovative and maybe something absolutely different comes up. So a group of doctors looking at a medical problem, only a group of doctors will restrict their way or their perspective. But bring in a designer there, bring in an artist there, bring in maybe a microchip producer, and you will have different perspectives. And they can join together to form a beautiful, crazy quilt. So what will the entrepreneur do? Network. He has a huge network with not just a preconceived group of people, but everyone, all possible stakeholders. So that is his principle. The fourth principle of effectuation, that is the principle of the crazy quilt. We all love to travel, and flying on a plane is something we look forward to. An entrepreneur also does the same, but unlike us, he does not love to be the passenger of the plane, but he wants to be the pilot of the plane. That brings us to the fifth principle of effectuation, and the principle of being the pilot in the plane. Think of it. An entrepreneur needs to be proactive and not reactive. Entrepreneur controls the change and does not try to predict the future. I'll explain. Think of Jio in the Indian context. Long before Jio, people were already making phone calls over IP-based networks. Like we were already making Skype calls. We were there, WhatsApp call was there, and it was free. But still, the other players in the telecom industry were charging for the call. Now, when Mukesh Ambani came up with Jio, he realized that soon people will not be ready to be charged for their phone calls. So what he did, he invested in an optical fiber line, he invested in data and made the calling charges free. Before the market changed, he proactively changed the market. So what was he doing? He was acting like the pilot in the plane, driving the entire industry towards his destination. He could see the vision, he had a vision, and he made it happen and not wait for the industry to have the changes and the market make the changes. So an entrepreneur will be proactive. He will try to guide the industry, lead the industry, break the norms, and not wait for the market to change, not react. He will proact. So that would be the last principle of effectuation, being the pilot in the plane. To sum up, we have been exploring the different principles of effectuation. And anyone who is not an entrepreneur, the good news is he can practice these principles to think like an entrepreneur. You can get into the mindset of an entrepreneur the moment you start thinking in the lines of these 5 principles. And if you look at it this way, there are only 2 types of people in the world. Either you are an entrepreneur or you are working for one. Both ways, if you have an entrepreneurial mindset, helps. It helps if you think like an entrepreneur. So whether we have been able to change the way you think, the way you look at the world, is not the question. Can you start thinking like an entrepreneur now? Now that you know these principles, can you practice it and be the change that you want to bring in the external world? So looking forward to more interaction with you, we have been trying to bring in or getting into the minds of an entrepreneur. Let us come, let us join and change the world. Thank you so much.